government outside Africa sanctions those deals, it doesn't make any difference to ZANU. They're going to get that money, it's going into their coffers. So I would really emphasize what Grace had said about the need to work very, very closely with SADC. I think the only prospect for averting what is likely to be a real disaster in these elections in terms of physical oppression and political oppression is working very closely with SADC and making sure there's enough money to fund credible elections and to fund all the safeguards. Now, we've got several figures being bandied around. We started $85 million to organize these elections. They go up to $250 million. You can take your choice. But what it seems to me is that it suits ZANU-PF to run out of money. It suits them very well to have elections on a shoestring, because you know the first things that are going to happen when you have elections on the shoestring is going to be lack of accountability and lack of communication, lack of reporting, and people are just going to back off. We don't know whether it's free or fair. And I think that would be a huge disaster. So I would argue very strongly that the European Parliament, if it wishes to be relevant in these matters, has to support a tripartite effort. That is, the wider international community, plus the UN, and the UN Development Programme is prepared to fund those elections, and that funding is acceptable to SADC, it's acceptable to the African Union, to work very closely with the UN system and SADC, and make sure that there is enough funding to have properly accountable elections. $20 million, for example, is required to link up all the polling centres digitally and electronically, so that when people go to cast their vote, at the end of the day, they can photograph the election tally sheets, and there is no argument about what people voted, because it will be transmitted electronically, and the signed sheets will be made available. The voter registration people have been talking about this evening, that was a disaster last time, even before you got to the physical violence meted out against activists in the last election. The electoral list was full of people who were deceased or are too young to vote. The only way to deal with that is biometric voter registration. It's difficult, it's costly, and it takes time. But again, that's the only way to get a straight electoral roll. That requires another set of investments. And I don't see anyone rushing forward in cash-strapped Europe or the UN system to put money into that. But unless you have that, you end up with a dodgy electoral register, and then you impugn the credibility of the subsequent election. Just like to end on situating this in a wider global context, because this is a tremendous moment for Africa. There is money flowing into Africa like it never has before since the 1960s, since independence became, in terms of percentage terms. Last year, the last 2 months of the year, over $850 million, pushing on $1 billion, went into African equities. Actually, not into South Africa, but into other countries, including Zimbabwe, Kenya, Nigeria. There is a huge interest in foreign capital, not just from Asia, India, China, and the Americas, but also from Europe and South America, and going into Africa, particularly Zimbabwe. There's great potential, and I think that the danger is that the West, thinking particularly of Europe, by shilly-shallying on its policies, is going to lose that chance to have some influence. And I think the only way to have influence is working very, very closely with SADC and writing some checks, some quite big checks, to make sure that these elections are worthwhile. Because if we go forward, and I reported on 2002 and 2008 elections, and the devastation after 2008 election, a lot of Zimbabweans said, we never thought we'd see this again. And they all said, it can't happen again. It can't be this bad. We can't see this much death and destruction. And unfortunately, last time I was there, which was towards the end of last year, those people who were telling me that in 2008 were now saying, we are really worried that we will see a repeat process of this. We'll get the violence, we'll get the dodgy election, and the rest of the world will say, oh, we tried. We had a few sanctions and we tried. That's not good enough. This time I think we really need to do a lot more to have decent elections. Thank you. Thank you.